So I suppose I'll talk a little bit about the motivation for this piece, and the form and the way that it's constructed. Follows basically the procedural apparatus and series of constraints that I used in the two that follow in this series that I'm kind of abbreviating as the Paradise Lost series. And in the first one of those, I contemplated what the meaning of paradise was, and I suppose what it means to be expelled from such a place, and this various notions of otherness, from the idea of stranger, foreigner, um, the racial other, whatever it might be that constitutes justification for expulsion. And then in that one, there was an understanding of the idea of paradise as being discrete, from the idea of heaven. And as that idea evolved, we started to think about whether it was in fact, the apple of knowledge and experience that is the sufficient cause, for expulsion from this idea of paradise, or whether a more accurate depiction would be to suggest that the apple is one of ignorance, and then that played out in various ways in terms of feigned ignorance and self-delusion, willed ignorance, one could say, and where that idea might lead, and the rejection, in a certain sense, of knowledge. And I think this third installment really plays into that idea of the rejection of knowledge and the apple of ignorance, because what's being expelled in this instance, from the Garden of Paradise, are books, and and the way that books are expelled from the Garden of Paradise is in the traditional manner in which books are expelled from the Garden of Paradise, by being banned, right? Banned and burned, or banned and burned, or burned and banned. I guess you have to be banned before you can be burned. The Nazis, used to have book burning ceremonies and parties, and we're getting pretty close to there. And of course, there's the Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit. What is it? Gosh, what's the what is the temperature at which 245 is? What is the temperature at which paper burns? Fahrenheit. I should know this, shouldn't I? Fahrenheit. Let me. Well, I don't really want to close this, but whatever, whatever, whatever the temperature in Fahrenheit is, that paper burns at. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit, whatever that number is, and I don't know why I want to say 245. Maybe because Trump was the 45th president of the United States, and this in many ways addresses the concerns that arise from his second term in office, and the bizarre selections for cabinet that we've been witnessing lately. But in any case, whatever the number that is, and I think it's must be something around 245, based on when paper would burn, and my wood burning stove, when I used to use paper as kindling, which wasn't very often. I had good pine, so that's generally what I would split into tiny little slivers and use as kindling for the oak. But in any case, what's being expelled from the Garden of Paradise, here, are the books, and hence the title, The Expulsion of Books. And this one, as I said, the basic procedural operation is the same. Finding from the internet, famous examples of poems, in this case, that not only have, either have the word book or have the word library, because often this occurs in public libraries or in school libraries. And recently in Albuquerque, there was a school board meeting in which, the topic seemed to be the banning of books, and this made the news. And of some concern was the presence of an individual pastor, and I was always suspicious by this word pastor, because there don't really seem to be any qualifications, for being a pastor. You just have to be sort of willing to be, pompous and get on stage and preach whatever it is that you believe to be the Word of God, no matter how controversial or contrary it is, to what actually seems to be reasonable for a divine being to say. And this individual, John Amanchukwu, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm sure he has a different pronunciation for it. I'm not going to worry about it too much. And I think he's a pastor from South Carolina. He's black. The name sounds African. I don't know if he's of African descent or if he simply has an African name, but he's an evangelical, and he likes to preach in terms of there's a sort of hellfire and brimstone style, and use words like perversion and sin, and all of the things that for quite some time intellectuals have been concerned with. The idea of this kind of intolerance of a reasonable human existence exists in James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. If you recall, one of the, if I can say, scenes, in that particular short novel, that in some ways is the kind of buildings roman and self-portrait of the life of James Joyce. We know he was a young man, although it's played out, through the characterization of a fictional character by the name of Stephen Dedalus. But Stephen Dedalus, is as a young man, attends Catholic school, in which this kind of hellfire and brimstone ideology and I hesitate to call it set of values is propagated and promulgated, I suppose is a good word, and there's a long sermon about all of the punishments that will be inflicted upon those who fail to measure up to the virtue that this particular variety of Catholicism purports to educate its youth in, and so when I and having fairly expansive literary background, when I see this sort of evangelizing, I have a lot of both experiential and literary material to compare it to, and so it's nothing new. It's nothing particularly impressive. It's exactly what it seems to be. It's malice and reptile mind, wrapped up in a colorful wrapper of religiosity, and it's nothing more or less than that. Hatred preached in the name of Jesus Christ, and we honestly, we've had enough of that. We had enough. I think the Catholic Church is participation in supporting and its complicity in the extermination of Jews and Gypsies and others that were marginalized by the Nazis in World War II was kind of enough, and for some of us, and so that when we hear this style of preaching and this casting of stones and fingers and whatnot, it seems simultaneously humorous, ridiculous, absurd, and like extraordinarily, frustrating, infuriating and annoying. So both, all of that, can occur, simultaneously, so that was, perhaps the immediate, or the let's see, what in Aristotle's causes, what's the immediate cause called? It's like there's like a material cause, and there's a sufficient cause, and there's a telos, right? Final cause. That's like what the thing, and then there's like some. And there's another one, but that's like the spark. Well, anyway, this was the spark, and if that's one of Aristotle's causes, that's what it was, and you can figure out what that is. It slips my mind at the time. Right now, it slips in my mind, but whatever it is that he refers to the immediate cause as, this was sort of the spark, I suppose, and then but book banning under this alt-right new regime has been a thing for a while, and prior to the rise of neo-fascism and global neo-fascism, not just in the United States, but within the last few years. But prior to that, book banning has a long history in the United States, and so some of this material is, comes from books that were banned, either here or elsewhere. Celle qui est trop gay is one of the poems in Le Frère le Mal, the Charles Baudelaire, which there were several, and that's a good place to start. Like, so why are these things banned? I mean, and it's interesting. They're banned for the same reason that Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden. A lot of times they're banned because they expose, right? They expose like the sexuality and passion, like that was hidden, in a certain way from Adam and Eve, and they weren't aware of their own nakedness, right? So a lot of these book bannings, are justified in terms of like the expression of sexuality, particularly like sexuality that falls outside of whatever the this sort of like ultra conservative traditional camp regards as heteronormative, right? So and that's long been the case. Howl, Allen Ginsberg was banned, and Howl is in fact here. I'm not going to say what everything is and what every reference is, because I think part of the pleasure of investigating, a poem like this is like to recognize and say like, oh, I recognize that from, this one, or that's from that one, or I don't know where that is. Maybe I can find out. And I think part of the pleasures of this particular aspect of the poetics is in discovery. And I've always felt that way. And that's why I haven't always documented. Some poets are meticulous about documentation. I mean, Jackson McClough tends to be. There are others, who tend to be. I know on Jerry's, poems and poetic sites, and I can't remember the guy's name. I don't think it's very interesting, but this long, like, I guess it's conceptual poetry, but has this like expressive, like poetry feel to it. Like it runs on and on, like beat poetry. So it's odd that it's conceptual, but it's basically like miles and miles of quotation that to me kind of feels like a sausage factory. You end one here when you end one here, but all the sausages are the same. I mean, they all have this kind of like long-winded, like never-ending line that, just goes on in this, apparently stream of consciousness way, no matter what the source is of all this stuff. I can't remember the guy's name. It's probably better because I'm not really calling him out for being uninteresting. But, there are a lot of conceptual poets that I don't think are particularly interesting, even though I do dabble in conceptual poetry as well as other things, but I'm not interested in, Kenneth Goldworks. Kenneth Kenneth Gold, what's his last name? Gold something. And the fact that I can't remember his last name, demonstrates that I'm how uninterested in him I am, and part of it, I guess, is like the relentlessness, with which the act of engaging, in extant text occurs, and I really see no, rationale for like close investigation and actual like deep reading, close reading, analysis, interpretation. It seems like a gestural act, and I have nothing against the gestural act. Kenneth Goldbloom? No, I don't. I really don't know. I really can't remember. And but in my work, I try to offer like different levels of engagement, and one of those levels of engagement here is either in recognizing or failing to recognize a line, or recognizing how that line was altered. Now, so given that, I will say that this one breaks with the rather sort of relentlessness. The first two pieces presented extant text, that is text that I would find from famous but not necessarily writers that I liked, authors of poetry on the internet, that just looking up in terms of the word that I wanted to excise from the poem, which would typically be the last word in Paradise. This would be the word books. Here, that operation is slightly open, and it could be books, or the poem would either have to have the word books or library, or refer in some way to books or library. The context in which these books are kept, and the context within which most of this banning occurs. Like, people actually, it's not quite as bad as Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 245 or whatever the number is. I still kind of like the idea that it's 45, that it's a reference to Donald Trump. But what is the temperature? Which maybe it's a lot higher than that. Now I kind of want to. Can I just do a break quickly, and we'll get out of this and look up what the temperature at which paper burns actually is. Because now 451. So I had that 4. So this is kind of like what being a dyscalculic, is not being able to remember. Now I said, what did I say? I said 245, and that's like almost just half. 451 degrees is actually pretty hot. If you've ever put your hand in a 451 degree fire, you'll realize very quickly, just how hot that is. I thought that it must be a lot lower, and that's really interesting, isn't it? So Fahrenheit 451. Maybe I'm rejecting this idea because it could be read as 45-1, as in 45-1 both in 2020 and in 2024, and my mind rebels at that idea, and it's finding ways of like reorchestrating that number and addressing 45 rather than conceding an election, even though he might have conceded. One of the interesting things about Trump's claim of a mandate is as more and more of the vote comes in, it turns out that he did win the election, even the popular vote, but by less of a margin than the margin that Hillary won by when he initially took office, right? In the vote of 2016, in which he took office in 2017. So Hillary Clinton actually won by a greater margin in 2016. The popular vote, I'm not saying she won the electoral vote, but that's a different thing, right? But she actually won the popular vote by a greater margin than Trump won in this last election against Kamala Harris. And so this mandate is kind of sketchy, considering that we had a more popular winner, and that unfortunate more popular winner didn't even ever get to be president. All right, so it's 4-5-1. And I don't know. I mean, like, if I were a crypto fascist, I guess I could be interested in this. The problem with it being, accessible to crypto fascism is the idea in Fahrenheit 451 is actually contrary to the censorship ideals and the banning of book ideals that these folks actually have. So that having been stated, I think we can go back and get into what we were doing before. All right, so I'm kind of explaining that, and I'm suggesting that part of the fun is identifying some of the stuff that's in here, and then I've also taken certain liberties, and I don't think they'll be like giving too much away to say, for example, like Leaves of Grass is a reference to Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, obviously, which has at various times and in various, for various reasons, also suffered banning and censorship in various libraries, and depending on where you are in the country, different reasons may arise for that. But that's also related, to the idea of an expulsion of the sexual, right from the confines of whatever the new paradise is, some kind of puritanical idea of library, and some kind of puritanical idea of the integrity of family and community in the United States of America. So that's there, but no direct quote from it in that line. Some of this stuff I just sort of expounded upon and expanded upon in the way that traditional poets do, linking one found line to another found line, via a bit of creative writing. So in this very non-Kenneth Goldsmith way. So I said Kenneth Goldsmith, and I wasn't thinking about the name, and I'm pretty sure that's right. So let's just call him Kenny Goldsmith from now on. So if it was Kenny Goldsmith and this was the operation, well, for one thing, he wouldn't have set it up, with the mesostic in the middle. That's more Jackson McClough idea, and McClough or Cage, would both have done something like that, and then which involves a certain amount of creativity, because you have to figure out how to put the lines on the page, and how you want to space everything, and how they're going to configure together. And there's a certain amount of grammatical flow that goes on, so that was there. And then there's a certain amount of creativity that I allow myself to expound upon and add stuff, particularly around the idea of banned books, my knowledge of banned books and the history of banned books, and hence Leaves of Grass comes in. And there's some Shel Silverstein. Like I said, I don't want to give too much away. I won't point to where Shel Silverstein comes in. And then there are some surprises, and there are references that have nothing to do with, or taken from poets, who weren't banned, and from poems that weren't banned, but that either explore the idea of book or that explore the idea of library. Okay, so all of that having been said, I think we'll attempt a reading, and I haven't read this poem before, so we're improvising or improvising, as some of our characters like to say, and I don't know where we're going, and I don't know how this is going to work out, and if it's really terrible, then we can just cut it and we can do it some other time. So That's a nice thing. When you improvise and you record it, you don't have to, publish it endlessly. If it turns out really terrible, you can, just do it in another venue and see if it works out better the next time. So we'll see. Usually I get into a rhythm and then, we can go from there. There is in the library called A Dictionary of Angels, a book titled Human Landscapes from My Country, upon one of whose pages, each fabricated entirely from leaves of grass, a celle qui est trop gai has been transcribed in the margin. Are you going to let your emotional life be run by America? Do not speak to me of martyrdom, of men like Malcolm X who die to be remembered. Labor and toil, the bath, gymnasium, playground, and college. Brother of all, with generous hand, the light of understanding has taught me courtesy, stained with kisses and sand. Shut not your doors to me, proud libraries. I have made for your dear sake a Shinto we thought was lost, but recovered in the house though dark and shuttered in the flickering flutter of a light left in the attic, where I could still see it from the outside, in the world between the covers of notes on the art of poetry and Blake light tragedy among the scholars of war, and we smile foolishly as if we didn't know. I borrowed from the local marginalia on the day when my words were bitter apples in the dim corner of a late light, beaks of raven, and kite. So my first memory was always big as a raisin in the sun, big as a kite against the outline of sun at midday in sky. Are you going to let your emotional life be run by America, be run by Americans, be run for you against the interests of our democracy? What is it to be run in America by a lie, an emotional life chosen by someone else? What is it to be in America confined by an emotional life created by an individual like John Amanchukwu, a pastor from North Carolina who never spent time in the library called A Dictionary of Angels, but devotes his days to endless evangelizing a la the good, the bad, and the ugly, evangelizing a la black and white, good and evil, expulsion. This belongs to God. This one is cast out. Evangelizing a la Dirty Harry. Clint Eastwood takes his gun out. Are you feeling lucky, librarian? Are you feeling the word of God? A book titled Human Landscapes from My Country, from which I have been expelled, like the books in the library called A Dictionary of Angels under John Amanchukwu. There is in such a library the Dictionary of Angels, a book called Human Landscapes from My Country, upon whose pages, each fabricated entirely from leaves of grass, my name has been hand-scripted in the margin. Your name has been hand-scripted in the margin. His name has been hand-scripted in the margin. What I don't see in the margin are the words of John Amachukwu, who plays the part, as Charles Bronson played the part of Avenger, of emotional malice, the desire to cast out, the desire to carve in place a stone upon which good and evil is cut, chiseled with such clarity. There's hardly the room for humanity left to exist between the spaces that are left out in such a ridiculously confined text. Are you going to let John Amachukwu and John Amachukwu's emotionally immature existence run your life in America? Don't speak to me of martyrdom. Of men like Malcolm X, who died not to be remembered, who died because he had no other choice but die in the emotionally immature life run by individuals such as John Amachukwu in that moment in America. And though perhaps murdered for a different reason, does it matter? Does it matter what the reason the alterity is constrained by? Does it matter whether it's an immigrant or homosexual or an African American or a lesbian or Hispanic American that's murdered? Isn't it the fact that it's wrong to murder what matters? Isn't it the fact that all prejudice is wrong that matters? No matter what the content is of the prejudice? I don't remember Christ the Evangelist saying, racism is wrong, but misogyny is good. Or misogyny is good, but xenophobia is wrong. I remember something else. Something perhaps, though a pastor, John Amachukwu never quite got. Are you going to let your emotional life be run in America by the proponents of global fascism? Are you going to let your emotional life in America be run by Tucker Carlson? Are you going to let your emotional life in America be run by Donald Trump? Grifter, rapist, hypocrite, misogynist, xenophobe, imbecile? There is in the library called A Dictionary of Angels, a book titled Human Landscapes, and it belongs to my country. And in the book titled Human Landscapes, which can be found in a library called The Dictionary of Angels, a cell qui est trop gay has been handscripted in the margin. So when you speak to me of the martyrdom of Christ and the idea of speaking the words, remember who really died in the service of fraternity, equality, liberty. Remember labor and toil. Remember the union of men. Remember the union of men and women and all of those who fall in between. The light of understanding has taught me courtesy, but perhaps not enough to turn the other cheek. I grew up in a small town in Southern California, a few miles from Camp Pendleton, the Marine base. And I learned very early that turning the other cheek was perhaps not the best strategy of survival in a place where brutality reigned. And unless you confronted the bully, you had every expectation of being hit again and again and again. So I may have considered myself at one time a Christian, but more to the idea than to the letter, because survival for some of us has always been important, and the protection of others has been important too, including the books expelled from the libraries. Shut not your doors to me, proud libraries, nor to them, nor to this one, nor to that one. We have made for your dear sake. A Shinto we thought was lost, a Christianity we thought was lost, a Buddhism we thought was lost, a Hinduism we thought was lost, an Islam we thought was lost, a paganism we thought was lost, a shamanism we thought was lost, an idea of the Creator we thought was lost, a belief we thought was lost, a principle we thought was lost, a credo we thought was lost, but rediscovered in the house, though dark and shuttered, in the flickering flutter of a light left on in the attic, where I could still see it from the outside, in the world between the covers of notes on the art of poetry and Blake light tragedy among the scholars of war. We smile, foolishly as if we don't know that the Shinto was ever lost, that the Buddhism was ever lost, that the spirit was ever lost, that the ghost was ever lost, that the soul was ever lost and left wondering. Outside. expelled from what was once, the ideal of paradise, the material reality of place, sanctuary. And we smile foolishly as if we didn't know the light of understanding, what the word courtesy once meant, stained with kisses and sand. And we smile foolishly as if we didn't know the meaning of library, the meaning of book, the meaning of hand-scripted name in the margin of a dictionary of angels, of what a human landscape from my country was meant to look like. And we smile foolishly among the scholars of war, and we smile foolishly in a dim corner of a late light. I borrowed from the local marginalia on the day when my words were bitter apples, as bitter as the apples of ignorance, bitter as the apples of war, bitter as the apples of hatred, bitter as the apples of malice, bitter as the apples of a lack of light, of no light left in the attic, bitter as the apples in which the memory of courtesy is forgotten, and those who died to be remembered are unmarked and unrecognized and unrecognizable in a land from which the human now has been expelled from my country, and whose pages are now no longer fabricated from leaves of grass, and upon whose pages nothing has been hand-scripted in the margin. Are you going to let America excise the hand-scripted words written in the margin of a dictionary of angels? Are you going to allow your emotional life to be run by J.D. Vance? And Blake Light, Tragedy Among the Scholars of War, we smile foolishly as if we didn't know. I borrowed from the local marginalia on the day when my words were bitter apples in a dim corner of a late light, beaks of raven and kite. So my first rhymes were always big. So my first memories were always borrowed. So my first days were always filled with foolish smiles, as if I didn't know. As if I couldn't see, as if I didn't remember. America has always wanted to expel the truth of your emotional life. Are you going to let American fascism expel you from the human landscape that is your country.